"I can make your mother walk," said the pregnant cleaning woman. And he laughed but froze when Jennifer Morrison was scrubbing the marble floor of the mansion in Aspen when the screams echoed through the main hallway. 7 months pregnant, she felt the weight of her belly with every movement, but she needed that job more than anything in life. "Mother, you're pretending again," vociferated Richard Thompson, the owner of the house. "Enough of this nonsense about not being able to walk. The doctors said there's nothing wrong with your legs." Jennifer stopped scrubbing and discreetly looked toward the living room. Mrs. Eleanor, a 73-year-old woman, was sitting in her wheelchair with her gaze fixed on the window, as if she didn't hear the insults from her own son. Her hands trembled slightly on the blanket covering her legs. "You want to drive me crazy, is that it?" continued Richard, his voice filled with contempt. 2 years without walking, 2 years making a fool of me, and me here supporting this whole charade." Jennifer felt a pang in her chest. It wasn't just because of the cruelty of those words, but because something about that scene was terribly familiar to her. She had seen that lost look before, that posture of someone closing themselves off from the world as a form of protection. Richard continued his litany of humiliations while walking in circles around his mother's chair. At 52 years old, he ran one of the largest construction companies in upstate New York, but he treated his own mother as if she were a burden. "Tomorrow I'll bring another doctor, and if he says you can walk, I'll put you in a nursing home, and that's it. I'm tired of this performance." It was then that Jennifer could no longer remain silent. She dropped the floor cloth, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked into the room with firm steps. Richard stopped talking and stared at her in surprise. "Excuse me, Dr. Richard," she said, using the respectful tone she had learned to use with her employers. "I can make your mother walk." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked her up and down, noticing the faded blue uniform, the yellow rubber gloves, the belly that was already quite noticeable under the fabric. Then he burst into laughter that echoed throughout the mansion. "You?" he said, pointing at her with contempt. "A pregnant cleaning woman is going to teach my mother to walk? I've heard everything in this life but this." "Because I know what's really paralyzing her," Jennifer finished, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Richard's laughter died in his throat. He froze in the middle of the room, staring at this woman who just 2 months ago cleaned his house without him even noticing her presence. How could a simple maid make such a definitive statement? Mrs. Eleanor, who until then seemed oblivious to everything, slowly turned her head toward Jennifer. Her eyes, once glazed over, now shone with an intensity that hadn't been seen in a long time. "What did you say?" asked Richard, his voice lower now, filled with a mixture of anger and curiosity. Jennifer took a deep breath. She knew she was risking her job, but something inside her wouldn't allow her to remain silent in the face of that injustice. Perhaps it was the memory of her own grandmother, who had also spent years in a wheelchair not because of physical problems, but because of a pain of the soul that no one had been able to understand. "Your mother has no physical injury, Dr. Richard. I've worked here for 2 months and I can see that. She doesn't walk because she doesn't want to walk, and she doesn't want to walk because something hurt her so much that she preferred to close herself off from the world." "You're crazy!" exploded Richard. "Are you saying my mother is pretending?" "I'm not saying she's pretending," replied Jennifer, cautiously approaching the wheelchair. "I'm saying she's protecting herself, and those who protect themselves usually have a very strong reason for doing so." Mrs. Eleanor continued to stare intently at Jennifer, as if she were the first person in years who truly saw her. Her hands stopped trembling, and she tilted her head slightly, as if weighing every word she heard. "What nonsense is this?" Richard ran his hand through his graying hair, visibly disturbed. "You're a cleaner. What could you possibly know about medicine?" Jennifer hesitated for a moment. Should she reveal her true background? Tell how she had lost everything? How a wrong decision by her husband had brought her there? She decided it was better to start slowly. "I understand people, Doctor, and your mother. She has the look of someone who has suffered a great disappointment. I've seen that before." "How ridiculous!" Richard gestured nervously. "My mother had the best treatment, the best doctors, and now you're telling me that—" "Richard," Mrs. Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a blade. It was the first time in months that she had pronounced her son's name so clearly. Let her speak, dear listener. If you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. The businessman looked at his mother with an expression of absolute shock. How long had it been since she had spoken to him directly? How long since she had shown interest in anything happening around her? "Mother, you don't need to listen to this nonsense. I want to hear it," said Mrs. Eleanor, with a firmness in her voice that surprised even Jennifer. "It's been a long time since someone has spoken to me as if I were a real person." Jennifer felt a wave of emotion rise in her throat. That phrase revealed so much about what was happening in that house. She knelt beside the wheelchair, ignoring the discomfort of her pregnancy. "Mrs. Eleanor, may I ask a question?" The lady nodded slowly. "Did you stop walking suddenly, or was it gradually?" "Suddenly," replied Mrs. Eleanor, her voice a whisper laden with pain. "And did something important happen that day? Some discovery, some news?" The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Mrs. Eleanor looked at her son, then at her own hands, and finally back at Jennifer. Her eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed in a long time. "I found out that my own son had sold the house where I raised my children," she said, each word coming out like a painful sigh. "The house where my husband built our dreams, where every corner held a memory of ours. He sold everything without telling me, forged my signature." Richard's face instantly paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't make a sound. "And it wasn't just that," continued Mrs. Eleanor, her voice now firmer. "I found out he had tampered with my accounts, transferred money, made risky investments with my savings, all without consulting me, as if I were an incapable child." Jennifer nodded understandingly. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together. "And when you discovered all this, you felt you could no longer trust anyone, that the world you knew had crumbled." "Exactly," sighed Mrs. Eleanor. "If my own son, whom I raised with so much love, was capable of betraying me like this, then who could I trust? It was easier to stop trying." Richard finally found his voice, but it came out strangled. "Mother, I can explain. Business was bad. I needed capital. I was going to return everything." 2 years, Richard," cut Mrs. Eleanor. 2 years have passed and you haven't returned anything. On the contrary, you kept lying. You kept treating me as if I were a burden." Jennifer slowly stood up, leaning on the chair. Her belly felt heavier by the hour, but her mind was completely focused on that revelation. "Mrs. Eleanor, can I tell you something? I'm not just a cleaning lady. I have a degree in physical therapy. I worked for 5 years in elderly rehabilitation. I lost everything when my husband ran off with our savings, but I can still recognize emotional paralysis when I see it." Richard exploded. "So you lied to work here, you falsified your resume?" "I didn't lie about anything," replied Jennifer calmly. "When the employment agency asked me about my experience, I said I was a cleaning lady. And I am for 2 months now. I also said I needed to work urgently because I'm pregnant and alone, and that's also true." She took a deep breath before continuing. "But the fact that I'm cleaning floors hasn't erased my education, Dr. Richard. I can still identify when someone is suffering from pain that isn't in the muscles or bones, but in the soul." Mrs. Eleanor extended a trembling hand toward Jennifer. "Can you really help me?" "I can try, Mrs. Eleanor. But the first step is you wanting to be helped, and the second is your son stopping to treat you as if you were crazy or lazy." Richard walked to the window, turning his back to the 2 women. His world was crumbling. Everything he had built, every justification he had created for his actions, was being questioned by a pregnant woman he barely even knew. "This is ridiculous," he murmured. "Completely ridiculous." "What is ridiculous, son?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, and there was a growing strength in her voice. "The fact that you stole from me, or the fact that I was so hurt that I couldn't walk anymore?" "I didn't steal anything," he turned abruptly. "It was family money. I had a right to it." "A right?" Mrs. Eleanor's voice rose an octave. "Did you have the right to sell the house where your father planted the garden that I tended for 40 years? Did you have the right to spend the savings we put together, penny by penny, for our old age?" Jennifer watched the confrontation with a mixture of sadness and hope. Mrs. Eleanor was responding, she was defending herself. This was enormous progress. "Mum, the business was going badly." "Then why didn't you talk to me?" exploded Mrs. Eleanor. "Why didn't you ask for my help? Why did you have to lie, falsify, hide?" "Because you never understood business." "But I understood trust," she shouted, and Jennifer saw her legs contract slightly under the blanket. "I understood honesty, and you trampled all over it." The silence that followed was broken only by the heavy breathing of the three. Jennifer realized she needed to intervene before the situation got out of control. "Mrs. Eleanor, what do you feel in your legs right now?" The question took everyone by surprise. Mrs. Eleanor looked down, as if she were really paying attention to her own legs for the first time in a long while. They're tingling," she said, surprised. "That's good, very good. It means there's a connection between your brain and your muscles. The problem was never physical, it was emotional." Richard came back closer to them, still visibly shaken. "So you're saying my mother can really walk again?" "I'm saying she never stopped being able to walk. She stopped wanting to walk. And now we need to find out if she wants to try again." All attention turned to Mrs. Eleanor. She was silent for a few minutes, looking at her own hands, then at Jennifer, then at her son. "I want to try," she said finally. "But I don't want false promises, and I don't want any more lies." Jennifer nodded. "No false promises, and no lies. But I need you to understand one thing, Mrs. Eleanor. The process might be difficult, not just physically, but emotionally. We'll have to talk about painful things." "I've already been living something painful for 2 years," replied Mrs. Eleanor. "At least now I'll have someone to listen to me." Richard Thompson ran his hand over his face, visibly exhausted. "All right, we'll try. But I want to be involved in everything. I want to understand what's happening. As long as you promise not to humiliate your mother anymore," said Jennifer Morrison, staring firmly at him. "As long as you promise to treat her with the respect she deserves." Richard hesitated. "I'll try." "I don't want you to try," cut Mrs. Eleanor. "I want you to do it, or this conversation ends right here." The firmness in his mother's voice made Richard realize something had definitely changed. This was no longer the silent, apathetic woman of the last 2 years. A strength was being reborn in her. "All right, Mother, I promise." Jennifer felt a slight contraction in her abdomen and disguised the discomfort. She still had 2 months to go until the birth, but the stress wasn't doing any good for her or the baby. "Mrs. Eleanor, how about we start slowly? Tomorrow we can do some simple exercises, talk a little. No rush, no pressure." "Yes," the lady agreed. "But I want you to know something, Jennifer. It's been a long time since someone has treated me like a person. Thank you for that." Jennifer felt her eyes fill with tears. She knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible, disposable, worthless. In the last few months since her husband had left, taking all their savings and dreams, she had experienced that feeling firsthand. "Thank you for giving me a chance, Mrs. Eleanor." Richard watched the exchange between the two women with a confused expression. He couldn't understand how one conversation had changed the atmosphere of the house so much. His mother seemed more alive than she had been in years. "Jennifer," he said, hesitantly, "do you need anything? For the exercises, I mean." "Not for now. We'll start with very basic conversations and movements, but eventually we will need some simple equipment." "All right, I'll provide whatever is necessary." That night, Jennifer returned to her small rented apartment on the outskirts of Aspen with a strange feeling in her chest. It was as if, after months of darkness, a small light had been lit in her life. She made some chamomile tea and sat on the porch, stroking her belly. The baby was moving a lot, as if also stirred up by the day's events. "Will we be able to do it, little one?" she whispered. "Will we be able to help that lady walk again?" But deep down, Jennifer knew the real question was, would she herself be able to walk again? Metaphorically speaking, of course, since Michael had left, taking not only the money they had saved to open their own clinic, but also her self-confidence. She felt as if she had also forgotten how to put one foot in front of the other. Perhaps helping Mrs. Eleanor would also be a way of helping herself. In the mansion, dinner proceeded in a different silence. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of recent years. There was something in the air, an expectation, a possibility. Richard pushed the food around his plate without much appetite. His mother's words echoed in his mind. If my own son was capable of betraying me like that, then who could I ever trust? He had never thought of his actions as betrayal. In his head, he was saving the family business, protecting the assets, but for the first time, he tried to see the situation through Mrs. Eleanor's eyes. How did she feel upon discovering the house where she had raised her children no longer existed? What was it like to realize the money she and her husband had saved for decades had been spent without her knowledge? "Mother," he said suddenly. Mrs. Eleanor looked up from her plate. "I'm sorry." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Sorry for what exactly?" For everything. For selling the house. For using your money. For treating you poorly all these years. And for forging my signature." Richard swallowed hard. "And for forging your signature. And for calling me crazy, fake, lazy. And for that too." Mrs. Eleanor nodded slowly. "It's a start, Richard. It's a start." They finished their meal in silence, but it was a different silence. There was pain there was much to be repaired, but there was also hope. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Mrs. Eleanor dreamed she was walking. The next morning, Jennifer arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. She had brought a folder with some notes and exercises she remembered from her time as a physical therapist. She found Mrs. Eleanor in the living room, already dressed with her hair done. It was clear she had taken more care with her appearance than normal. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor. How was your night?" "Restless," the lady admitted. "I dreamed I was walking in the garden of my old house. It had been a long time since I'd had a dream like that." "That's very good. It means your subconscious is preparing for the possibility of walking again." Jennifer sat in a nearby chair and opened her folder. "Let's start with some simple questions, all right? I want to better understand what happened the day you stopped walking." Mrs. Eleanor took a deep breath. "It was on a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was always the day I cleaned the house to get ready for my grandchildren's visit on the weekend. But they hadn't come for months." "Why?" "Richard had fought with his daughter. He said she only cared about the inheritance, that she was turning the children against him. He forbade the kids from visiting me." Jennifer mentally noted another element of the situation. Mrs. Eleanor's loneliness was deep and multifaceted. "Please continue." "I was looking for some old papers in Richard's office when I found the documents for the sale of the house. My signature was there, but I knew I had never signed anything like that." Her voice began to tremble. "I called the buyer, identified myself. He confirmed the sale had been made 6 months prior. 6 months, and I knew nothing about it." "What did you do then?" "I confronted Richard when he got home from work. He said I was getting senile, that I had forgotten signing it. He laughed in my face when I showed him the signature was clearly forged." Jennifer saw Mrs. Eleanor's hands clench into weak fists. "And was it during that conversation you found out about the money too?" "He ended up confessing everything in a burst of anger. He said I was an outdated old woman, that I didn't understand modern business, that he was saving me from my own incompetence." "How did you feel at that moment?" "I died inside," sighed Mrs. Eleanor. "Literally died inside. It was as if all the foundations of my life had disappeared at once. If I couldn't trust my own son, who could I trust?" "And the next day?" "The next day, I tried to get out of bed and I couldn't. My legs just wouldn't obey anymore. It was as if my body had decided it wasn't worth trying anymore." Jennifer nodded understandingly. She had seen similar cases during her years of work. Deep emotional trauma could indeed cause real physical symptoms. "Mrs. Eleanor, I want you to try something now. Very slowly, don't force it." "What?" "I want you to try to wiggle your toes." Mrs. Eleanor looked down, concentrating intensely. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, Jennifer saw a small movement under the blanket. "Did you do it?" I think so." I felt something. Excellent. Now let's try moving your ankles. Very slowly. This time the movement was more visible. Mrs. Eleanor looked at Jennifer with wide eyes. I can do it, I can really move. Of course you can. Your spinal cord wasn't damaged, your muscles didn't completely atrophy. The problem was here. Jennifer gently touched her own chest at heart level. And here. Then she touched her temple. Not in your legs. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Mrs. Eleanor began to cry softly. They were tears of relief, of hope, of a possibility she had buried 2 years ago. Does that mean I can really walk again? It means physically nothing is preventing you from walking, but we still have a lot of emotional work ahead. Walking again also means exposing yourself again, trusting again, facing the world again. I want to try. It was at that moment that Richard entered the room. He had left early for the office, but something made him come back home. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was remorse. How are things going here? Your mother managed to move her toes and ankles, informed Jennifer. Richard looked at his mother with an unreadable expression. Is that good? It's an excellent sign, confirmed Jennifer. It shows the neurological connection is intact. So she really can walk again? With time, patience, and a lot of emotional work, yes. Richard sat in a nearby armchair, visibly shaken. Mom, I had no idea. I never thought that your actions could affect me so much, completed Mrs. Eleanor. That says a lot about how you see me, Richard, as if I were an object, not a person with feelings. That's not it. Yes, it is. For years you treated me like a burden, like someone who was in your way. And when I stopped working, instead of trying to understand what had happened, you simply labeled me as problematic. Jennifer watched the dialogue between mother and son attentively. It was important for them to talk, to externalize the pent-up feelings. I was desperate, admitted Richard. Business was really bad. I was going to lose everything. And you lost it anyway, pointed out Mrs. Eleanor. The difference is that now you've also lost your mother's trust, your children's respect, and probably your own dignity. The business recovered. At the cost of my house, my money, my trust. Was it worth it, Richard? He remained silent for a long moment. No, he finally whispered. It wasn't worth it. At least you admit that, said Mrs. Eleanor. It's more than you've done in the last 2 years. Jennifer felt it was time to intervene again. Mrs. Eleanor, how about we try some strengthening exercises now? Nothing too intense, just to reactivate the muscles. Yes, let's try. Dr. Richard, can you help? It will be good for both of you to work together on a common goal. Richard hesitated but nodded. What do I need to do? Let's help your mother transfer from the chair to the sofa. It's a simple exercise, but it requires her to use her leg muscles to support herself momentarily. Mrs. Eleanor looked nervous. What if I fall? We'll be here to catch you, assured Jennifer, but I'm sure you won't fall. Very carefully, they positioned Mrs. Eleanor so her feet touched the floor. Her legs trembled but held firm. I feel strange, she murmured. That's normal. It's been 2 years since you put weight on your legs. But look, they're holding. Slowly, with Jennifer on one side and Richard on the other, Mrs. Eleanor managed to stand up from the chair for a few seconds before sitting on the sofa. I did it, she said, disbelieving. I really stood up. Yes, you did, confirmed Jennifer with a huge smile on her face. Richard was visibly emotional. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Richard, your apologies are important, but they're not enough. I need to see real changes in your behavior. What do you want me to do? I want my house back. The response was direct and categorical. Richard paled. Mother, that's impossible. The house has already been sold. The money's been invested. Then uninvest it. Sell whatever you need to, but I want my house back. It's not that simple. To me, it is simple, Mrs. Eleanor cut in. You stole my house, now you're going to return it. I didn't steal. Forging a signature is theft, Richard. It doesn't matter if you're my son or not. The silence that followed was tense. Jennifer realized she was witnessing a battle of wills that had begun 2 years earlier. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said softly, "how about we leave this conversation for later? We've already made great progress today." "No," the woman said firmly. "I want to resolve this now." "Richard, are you going to return my house or not?" "Mother, be reasonable. I am the only one being reasonable in this room. You made a serious mistake. You hurt your own mother, and now you want me to just accept it and forget." "It's not about accepting or forgetting. Then what is it about?" Richard stood up and began pacing back and forth, visibly agitated. "It's about financial feasibility. The money from the sale was invested in equipment, in company renovations, in other words," interrupted Mrs. Eleanor, "you spent my money and now you can't return it. It's not exactly like that. It's exactly like that. You thought I'd die soon and never find out, or that I'd go senile and not care." "Mother, am I wrong?" Richard stopped pacing and stared at his mother. For a moment, Jennifer thought he would explode again, but instead, he collapsed into the armchair. "No," he admitted, "you're not wrong." The silence that followed was deeper than any scream. Mrs. Eleanor looked at her son with an expression mixing sadness and disappointment. "So you really thought I was disposable?" "I didn't think that." "Yes, you did. And do you know how I know? Because for 2 years you treated me like a broken piece of furniture you didn't know how to fix." Jennifer felt another contraction and disguised her discomfort by taking a deep breath. The stress of the situation wasn't good for her. "Mrs. Eleanor, may I suggest something?" Both looked at her. "How about we schedule a meeting with a lawyer, someone neutral who can explain what legal options we have to resolve this situation?" "We don't need a lawyer," Richard said quickly. "This is a family matter." "Exactly why we need someone neutral," replied Mrs. Eleanor. "Because you've already proven I can't trust your sense of justice." "Mother." "Jennifer, can you recommend a lawyer?" Jennifer hesitated. She knew some professionals from when she was setting up her own clinic, but didn't know if it would be appropriate to get so involved. "I can research some names if you'd like." "I would, and I want someone specialized in family matters." Richard looked defeated. "Fine, if that's what you want." "It's what I need," corrected Mrs. Eleanor. "I need to be sure my rights will be respected." Jennifer realized the session had taken a more intense turn than expected. Maybe it was time to wrap up for today. "Mrs. Eleanor, how about we rest a bit? We've made a lot of progress today, both physically and emotionally." "You're right. I'm feeling exhausted." "That's normal. Your body and mind are processing many changes at once." They helped Mrs. Eleanor back into her wheelchair, but now everyone knew she wouldn't need to be there forever. It was just a matter of time and work. "Jennifer," said Richard when his mother was taken to her room to rest, "can I talk to you?" "Of course. What do you think will happen now?" "I think your mother will continue to improve both physically and emotionally, but that will depend a lot on how you react to her demands." "Does she really expect me to be able to return the house?" "She expects you to try to show that you're willing to make sacrifices to repair the damage you caused. And if I can't, then at least she'll know that you tried. Sometimes the effort is more important than the result." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Jennifer, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "How did you lose everything? You mentioned that your husband—" Jennifer took a deep breath. It was still hard to talk about Michael. "My husband was always very ambitious. When we decided to open our own physical therapy clinic, he wanted to make a risky investment to speed up the process. He took out loans using our house as collateral, dipped into all our savings." "And the investment went wrong?" "The investment was a scam, a pyramid scheme in disguise. By the time we found out it was too late, we lost everything in a matter of weeks." "And he ran away?" "He couldn't handle the pressure. He said he couldn't look me in the eye knowing he had destroyed our dreams. One morning I woke up and found a note. He had taken the little money that was left and disappeared." "And you found out you were pregnant after that?" 2 weeks later, that's when I knew I really needed to start over from scratch. Richard was silent for a few minutes. That's why you understand so much about betrayal. That's why I understand so much about what it's like when someone you love destroys your trust. It's a pain unlike any other. And you? Were you able to forgive your husband? Jennifer thought about the question. I'm still working on it. Some days I can, others I can't. But I've learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting. It means choosing not to let the anger paralyze me. Like my mother was paralyzed. Exactly. The difference is that I had to keep going because there's a life growing inside me. Your mother had the luxury of stopping, of protecting herself. But now she's choosing to come back. And do you think she'll be able to forgive me? I think she will, but it won't be easy for either of you. That afternoon, Jennifer went home with a mixed feeling of hope and exhaustion. The day had been intense and revealing. She prepared a simple snack and sat down to research lawyers specializing in family law. She found some well-recommended names in the area and wrote down their contact information. Meanwhile, she thought about her own situation. Was she being hypocritical by advising Mrs. Eleanor to fight for her rights when she herself had simply accepted her husband's betrayal? But there were important differences between the cases. Michael had run away, he was unreachable. Richard was there, present, able to be held accountable for his actions. Besides, Mrs. Eleanor had the resources and support to fight. Jennifer was alone, pregnant, with no money or support network. Even so, she began to wonder if she shouldn't try to locate Michael, at least so he could take responsibility for the baby that was on the way. The next day, Jennifer arrived at the mansion carrying a list of lawyers and a slightly better mood. She had decided that helping Mrs. Eleanor was also a way of helping herself. She found the lady already up and sitting at the breakfast table, not in the wheelchair but in a regular chair. "Mrs. Eleanor, you got up by yourself." "I did," she said with pride. "It took a while, but I managed." "That's wonderful. How do you feel?" "Strange, but good. It's as if my body is remembering how to do things." Richard walked into the kitchen at that moment and stopped when he saw his mother sitting normally at the table. "Mom, I got up by myself this morning," she said simply, "and I plan to keep doing it." "That's incredible." "It's the first step," corrected Mrs. Eleanor. "I still have a long way to go." Jennifer sat at the table and took the list out of her purse. "I brought some lawyers' names for you to look over." Mrs. Eleanor took the list and examined it carefully. "Do you know any of them personally?" "I know this one." Jennifer pointed to a name. "Dr. Robert Wilson. He helped me with some documents when I was trying to set up my clinic. He's very honest and straightforward." "Then let's talk to him." Richard poured himself some coffee with slightly trembling hands. "Mom, I still think we can sort this out between us." "Richard, you had 2 years to sort this out between us. You chose to humiliate and ignore me. Now we're going to do it the right way." "But a lawyer will make everything more complicated." "More complicated for whom?" asked Mrs. Eleanor. "For you, who will have to take responsibility for your actions." "That's not it." "Yes, it is. You're afraid of what a neutral professional will say about your behavior." Jennifer realized she needed to step in before the conversation turned sour. "How about if I call Dr. Robert and schedule a consultation, just for you to talk, to understand what the options are?" "Good idea," agreed Mrs. Eleanor. "Mom, are you sure about this?" "I am. And you know why, Richard? Because for the first time in 2 years, I feel capable of fighting for my rights." The lawyer's appointment was scheduled for the following Friday. For the rest of the week, Jennifer continued working with Mrs. Eleanor on strengthening and stretching exercises. The improvement was remarkable. Each day, Mrs. Eleanor could stand for longer, take a few supported steps, make movements that 2 years ago seemed impossible. But the physical progress came with an emotional awakening that wasn't always comfortable. Mrs. Eleanor was rediscovering her strength, her voice, her ability to stand up for herself, and this created constant tensions with Richard. "Today I'm going to call my daughter," she announced on a Wednesday. "Mum, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because you forbade my grandchildren from visiting me? Because you made up lies about me?" I didn't make up lie. Yes, you did. You told Catherine that I was getting senile, that I didn't recognize anyone anymore, that it would be traumatic for the children to see me like that. I was protecting everyone. You were protecting your pride, cut in Mrs. Eleanor. You were ashamed to admit that you had stolen from your own mother. Jennifer watched these discussions with professional interest. It was part of the healing process. Mrs. Eleanor was regaining not only the physical ability to walk, but also the emotional ability to defend herself. Mrs. Eleanor, would you like me to help you make that call? Yes, I would. It's been a long time since I've spoken to Catherine. Catherine was Mrs. Eleanor's youngest daughter, who had moved to Denver after getting married. The relationship between the siblings had been strained for years, mainly because of Richard's constant attempts to control the family's life. When Mrs. Eleanor called, Jennifer could hear the emotional crying on the other end of the line. Mom, how are you? It's been so long. I'm better, dear. Much better. And I want to see my grandchildren. Of course, Mom, I'll come there this weekend. Richard said you didn't want visitors, that you were very weak. Richard lied, Catherine, about many things. There was a silence on the other end. Mum, what happened? It's a long story, dear. We'll talk in person. After hanging up, Mrs. Eleanor turned to Richard. Catherine is coming on Saturday, with the children. Mum, I can explain to her. No need. I will explain everything, the whole truth. Richard looked defeated. You're going to destroy our family. Our family was already destroyed, Richard. I'm trying to rebuild it on honest foundations. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. On Friday, the day of the appointment with the lawyer, Mrs. Eleanor was visibly nervous, but also determined. She had managed to walk a few meters with Jennifer's support the day before, a significant improvement. Dr. Robert Wilson received them in his office with the seriousness the case deserved. After hearing the whole account, he went straight to the point. Mrs. Eleanor, what your son did constitutes document forgery and embezzlement. These are crimes that could result in criminal charges. Richard turned pale. Doctor, isn't it possible to resolve this amicably? It is possible, yes, but it depends on your willingness to reach an agreement and on your financial ability to repair the damages. Dr. Robert, said Mrs. Eleanor, I don't want to press criminal charges against my son. I just want my rights back. I understand. In that case, we can work with an out-of-court settlement. Mr. Richard agrees to return the misappropriated funds and assets, and you refrain from filing criminal charges. And if he can't return everything, then we'll have to find alternatives. He could, for example, transfer some of his own assets to compensate for the damages. Richard was visibly shaken. Doctor, I'm going to lose everything. Mr. Richard, you've already lost the most important thing, your family's trust. Now it's a matter of deciding whether you want to regain it or not. What do you mean? Your mother is giving you a chance to make things right without facing criminal charges. That is very generous of her. But my business, your business was built with money that wasn't yours. Perhaps it's time to rebuild it honestly. The silence in the office was broken only by the sound of the lawyer's pen scribbling some notes. I will prepare a document detailing the proposed agreement, said Dr. Robert. You will have a week to review and decide if you accept the terms. On the way back home, Richard drove in complete silence. Jennifer was in the front seat and Mrs. Eleanor in the back. Richard, his mother said suddenly, you still have a chance to do the right thing. By doing what, Mother? Financially ruining myself? By morally rebuilding yourself, she replied. You may lose money, but you can regain your dignity. And if I can't pay it all back? Then we'll find a way. But first I need to see that you are truly trying. Jennifer realized she was witnessing a decisive moment for that family. Richard's choice in the coming days would determine whether there was a possibility of reconciliation or if the break would be final. That night she had trouble sleeping. The contractions had become more frequent, although they were still irregular. There were only 6 weeks left until the due date, and she was beginning to worry about what would happen afterward. Her work with Mrs. Eleanor was going well. but it was temporary. What would she do when the baby was born? How would she support a child on a cleaner's salary? For the first time in weeks, Jennifer cried. She cried from loneliness, from uncertainty, from fear of the future. She cried for the baby growing in her womb who would come into the world without a father, without financial stability, without a structured family. But she also cried with relief, because by helping Mrs. Eleanor regain her strength, she was rediscovering her own. Saturday arrived with a different energy in the mansion. Catherine had traveled from Denver with her 2 children, an 8-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl, and had arrived on Friday night. The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional. Catherine cried when she saw that her mother was much better than Richard had described, and she cried even more when she learned the truth about everything that had happened. "Mom, I never imagined. If I had known." "You couldn't have done anything, dear. Richard isolated me on purpose." The children, initially shy, soon warmed up to their grandmother. They had been deprived of this relationship for 2 years, but the affection was evident. "Grandma, why did Uncle Richard say you were very sick?" asked the boy, direct in the way only children know how to be. "Because Uncle Richard was confused, sweetheart. But now Grandma is getting better." Jennifer observed the family reunion with a mix of joy and melancholy. That was the family she would have liked to give her baby. Present, loving, united. But she knew her son would grow up without grandparents, without uncles, without the support network every child deserves. "Jennifer," said Catherine during lunch, "my mother told me how you helped her. I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me. Your mother is a very strong woman. I just helped her remember that. Even so, what you did was extraordinary." Richard participated in the conversations with evident discomfort. The presence of his sister and nephews made his situation even more embarrassing. "Catherine," he said during a pause, "you need to understand that I had reasons to—" "Richard, stop," interrupted Catherine. "There is no reason that justifies what you did to our mother. You don't understand the pressure I was facing, and you don't understand the pain you caused her. 2 years, Richard. 2 years without seeing my children because you lied about her condition." "I didn't lie." "Yes, you did. You said she was senile, that she didn't recognize anyone, that it would be traumatic for the children. And now I see a lucid woman who is recovering from a trauma you caused." The children noticed the tension and moved closer to their grandmother, who hugged them protectively. "Kids, how about we go see the garden?" suggested Jennifer. "Can we, Grandma?" asked the girl. "Of course, dear, but Grandma will need help to walk." "I'll help," said the boy, offering his arm. "Me too," added his sister. The image of Mrs. Eleanor walking through the garden, supported by her grandchildren, was touching. Jennifer followed closely, ready to intervene if necessary, but the lady was doing well. "Grandma, you're walking," exclaimed the girl. "Yes, I am, dear. Little by little, but I am." "Uncle Richard said you would never walk again." Mrs. Eleanor exchanged a meaningful look with Jennifer. "Uncle Richard was mistaken, love. Sometimes grown-ups get things wrong too." When they went back inside, they found Catherine and Richard in a heated argument in the kitchen. "You destroyed this family, Richard. I was trying to save the family business by stealing from our mother. It wasn't theft." "Yes, it was, and you know it." "Children," intervened Mrs. Eleanor, "how about you go watch television in the living room?" When only the adults remained in the kitchen, she addressed her children. "Stop this. I won't allow you to fight in front of me after 2 years of not speaking." "Mom, he needs to understand." "Catherine, I've already understood what I needed to understand. Now we need to decide how we move forward." "How can we move forward after what he did?" "By giving him a chance to make things right." "Mom, you're being too generous." "I'm being practical. Richard is my son, you are siblings, those children are your nieces. We can destroy everything for good, or we can try to rebuild." Richard, who had been on the defensive until then, seemed moved for the first time by the magnitude of what was at stake. "Mom, I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I want to." "Then accept the agreement the lawyer will propose. Return what is mine and let's try to have a fresh start." "What if I can't return everything?" Then we'll see what can be done. But I want to see real effort, Richard. I want to see that you understand the gravity of what you did." That night, after the children had gone to sleep, the three adults talked until late. It was a difficult, painful, but necessary conversation. Richard admitted that he had been feeling pressured by business and had made desperate decisions. He acknowledged that he had treated his mother disrespectfully and had lied to his sister about her condition. Catherine expressed her anger and disappointment, but also her willingness to try to rebuild the family relationship if Richard showed real changes. Mrs. Eleanor spoke about the 2 years of isolation, about how she had felt betrayed and abandoned, but also about her hope that the family could come together again. "Jennifer," said Catherine as the conversation was winding down, "do you have plans for after the baby is born?" "I'm not quite sure yet," admitted Jennifer. "I'll have to see how things develop." "If you want, you can stay here with us," offered Mrs. Eleanor. "This house is too big for one person, and I would like to have you nearby." "Mrs. Eleanor, that's very generous, but it's not generosity, it's necessity. You helped me get my life back. Now I want to help you build yours." "Mother is right," agreed Catherine. "You've done more for our family in the last few weeks than many professionals did in 2 years." Jennifer felt her eyes fill with tears. For the first time since Michael had left, she caught a glimpse of a future that wasn't just about survival. On Sunday, Catherine and the children left to go back to Denver, but with the promise to visit their grandmother regularly. The farewell was emotional, but it no longer carried the sadness of meetings that could be the last. "Grandma, will you be walking by yourself when we come back?" asked the boy. "I will try, dear. I will try very hard." "And will Aunt Jennifer's baby be born yet?" "Probably yes," replied Jennifer, stroking her belly. "That's great. I'm going to have a new cousin." The child's innocence brought smiles to everyone's faces. To her, Jennifer was already part of the family. The following Monday, Dr. Robert called with the settlement proposal. Richard would have 6 months to repay the value of the house and return the money he had taken from Mrs. Eleanor's accounts. If he couldn't come up with the full amount, he would have to transfer some of his personal assets to make up the difference. "It's a fair proposal," said the lawyer. "Considering we could be talking about a criminal case." Richard agreed to the settlement. There wasn't much to negotiate. He knew he had done wrong and that now he needed to pay the price. "Dr. Robert," asked Mrs. Eleanor, "if Richard fulfills the agreement, can we consider the matter legally closed?" "Yes. The settlement has legal standing and prevents future actions on the same subject." Then it's decided. In the days that followed, Richard began taking the necessary steps. He put some assets up for sale, renegotiated company contracts, and looked for alternatives to get the money he needed. Meanwhile, Mrs. Eleanor continued to make progress. She could already walk short distances without support and had started to take an interest again in activities she had abandoned 2 years earlier. "Jennifer, have you thought about reopening your physical therapy clinic?" she asked one afternoon. "I think about it every day, but I don't have the capital, I don't have the equipment. What if I invested?" "Mrs. Eleanor, when Richard returns my money, I'll have resources to spare. Why not use some of it for something productive?" "I don't know if that would be appropriate." "Why wouldn't it be? You have the skill, I have the capital. It could be a partnership." The idea was tempting, but Jennifer was hesitant. "Let me think about it a little." "Of course, but think seriously. You have a gift for this, Jennifer. I saw how you worked with me, how you understood what no other doctor could understand." That night, Jennifer really thought about the proposal. A partnership with Mrs. Eleanor could be the solution to all her problems. She would be able to support the baby, return to work in the field she loved, and still help other people. But there were also risks. What if it didn't work out? What if she disappointed Mrs. Eleanor like Michael had disappointed her? Her thoughts were interrupted by a contraction stronger than the previous ones. She looked at the clock. It was still too early for labor to begin, but perhaps it was better to stay alert. The next morning, the contractions had stopped, but Jennifer decided to schedule a doctor's appointment to make sure everything was all right. "Everything is normal," the obstetrician assured her. "But you're in your 8th month. It's important to slow down. avoid stress. "Doctor, I need to work. I understand, but your priority now should be the pregnancy. You've already been through a lot of emotional stress these past few months." Jennifer knew the doctor was right, but she couldn't stop working. She needed the money, and besides, she felt that Mrs. Eleanor still needed her. When she arrived at the mansion, she found a tense situation. Richard was arguing on the phone with someone, visibly upset. "What happened?" she asked Mrs. Eleanor. "One of the buyers for the assets Richard put up for sale backed out. He's desperate because he needed that money to fulfill the agreement. And now? Now he'll have to find other alternatives. Maybe sell his own house." Jennifer realized the situation was getting complicated. Richard could use this as an excuse not to fulfill the agreement, which would destroy all the progress made. "Mrs. Eleanor, may I suggest something?" "Of course. What if we talk to Dr. Robert about the possibility of splitting the payment into installments? Instead of 6 months, extend it to a year. Do you think that would help? I think it would relieve the pressure on Richard and show that you're being flexible. And it would also reduce the chances of him using financial difficulties as an excuse not to fulfill the agreement." "Exactly." When Richard finished the call, they presented the suggestion. He seemed relieved. "Mom, this would give me more time to organize things without having to sell everything at once." "Then let's talk to Dr. Robert." "Talk to Doctor." The change to the agreement was easily arranged. Richard would have a year to pay off his debt to his mother with fixed monthly installments. "Now you have no more excuses," said Mrs. Eleanor. "You have enough time to get organized." "Thank you, Mom. I'll keep my word, I promise." "I hope so, because this is your last chance." With the financial issue better structured, the atmosphere in the house became less tense. Richard seemed more focused and determined, and Mrs. Eleanor more confident that she would be repaid. "Jennifer," said Mrs. Eleanor a few days later, "have you thought about my proposal regarding the clinic?" "I have, yes." "And what's your decision?" "I think it would be an amazing opportunity, but I have a few conditions." "What are they?" "First, I want it to be a formal investment, not a favor, with a contract, defined percentages, clear responsibilities." "I agree." "Second, I want to start small. 1 room, basic equipment, a few patients at first." "That makes sense." "Third, I want to focus on cases like yours, patients who need emotional therapy as well as physical therapy." "Perfect. There are many people suffering in silence out there." "So do we have an agreement?" "We do. Let's look for a location and start planning." The excitement of planning the future was interrupted by a stronger contraction. Jennifer bent over slightly, taking a deep breath. "Jennifer, what's wrong?" I think the time has come. But there are still 3 weeks left. Sometimes babies are in a hurry," said Jennifer, trying to stay calm despite the pain. "Richard," shouted Mrs. Eleanor, "come here, quick." "What happened?" He came running. "Jennifer is going into labor. We need to take her to the hospital." "Now. Now." The rush that followed was intense. Richard brought the car to the front door of the house. Mrs. Eleanor grabbed the bag Jennifer had prepared weeks before, and within minutes they were on their way to the hospital. "It's okay, Jennifer," said Mrs. Eleanor, holding her hand in the back seat. "Everything will be fine." "I'm scared," admitted Jennifer between contractions. "Scared of what?" "Of being alone, of not being able to take care of the baby, of not being a good mother." "You're not alone, and you're going to be a wonderful mother, I know it." "How can you be sure?" "Because I saw how you treated me, with affection, with respect, with dedication. That's how you'll treat your child." The contractions were becoming more frequent and more intense. Jennifer took deep breaths, trying to remember the techniques she had learned, but the pain was becoming hard to bear. "We're here," announced Richard, stopping at the emergency entrance. A medical team was already waiting with a wheelchair. Jennifer was quickly taken to the delivery room, while Mrs. Eleanor and Richard stayed in the waiting room. "Richard," said Mrs. Eleanor after a few hours, "do you realize this girl has become part of our family?" "I do, and I think that's good for all of us." "Do you like her?" "I do. She got you walking again, Mother, literally and figuratively, and she made you become my son again." Richard looked at his mother, surprised by the statement. What do you mean? For years you were just my boss. You made decisions for me, ignored my feelings, treated me like a burden. Today you're here, worried about a woman we barely knew a few weeks ago. That's being a son again. Mother, Jennifer taught us that caring for someone isn't about controlling them. It's about respecting them, listening to them, supporting them. Richard nodded, understanding what his mother meant. She's going to need a lot of support in the coming months. And she'll have it. We're family now. After 6 hours of labor, Jennifer gave birth to a healthy baby girl. When they brought her to see the baby, she cried with emotion and relief. She's perfect, whispered Jennifer, looking at her little daughter in her arms. What will you name her? Asked the nurse. Jennifer had thought of many names during the pregnancy, but none seemed right. Now, looking at the girl who had been born amid so much drama and transformation, she knew exactly which name to choose. Eleanor, she said. Her name will be Eleanor. When Mrs. Eleanor heard the chosen name, she couldn't hold back her tears. Jennifer, you didn't have to. It's not an obligation, it's gratitude. You gave me a new life. I want my daughter to carry your name. May I hold her? Of course. Mrs. Eleanor took the baby in her arms with the care of someone who had waited 2 years to be a grandmother again. Little Eleanor opened her tiny eyes and seemed to look directly at her. Hi, little one, whispered Mrs. Eleanor. Welcome to the family. Richard watched the scene with emotion. He had lost years of being with his own nieces and nephews because of his mistakes. Now he had a second chance to be a present and caring uncle. Jennifer, he said, if you need anything at all, just say the word. Thank you, Richard. That means a lot to me. I mean it. Consider yourself officially part of the family. 2 days later, Jennifer was discharged and went straight to the mansion. The room Mrs. Eleanor had prepared for her was now equipped with everything a baby could need. Mrs. Eleanor, you didn't have to buy all this. Of course I did. This is Eleanor's house now too. But it's so much. Jennifer, for 2 years, I had no grandchildren to spoil. Now, I have a little honorary granddaughter to make up for lost time. Adjusting to the first days with the baby was easier than Jennifer expected. Mrs. Eleanor was always there to help, and even Richard proved to be a dedicated uncle. She has your smile, he said, watching the baby. Do you think so? I do. And she'll be smart like her mother. A week after Eleanor's birth, Catherine came to visit them with the children. The joy of the reunion was contagious. Can I hold my cousin? The little girl asked. Yes, you can, but be very careful. She's so tiny. That's how you were when you were born, said Mrs. Eleanor. And look how you've grown. Grandma, now we have a baby in the family again. Yes, we do, sweetheart. And what a blessing that is. The months that followed brought big changes for everyone. Mrs. Eleanor continued to progress in physical therapy and was soon walking normally. Richard religiously fulfilled the terms of the agreement and began rebuilding his relationship with the family. Jennifer went back to studying and preparing to reopen her career. When Eleanor turned 6 months old, the small physical therapy clinic finally opened its doors. It was a modest but welcoming space, specializing in emotional and physical rehabilitation. I think we should give the clinic a name, suggested Mrs. Eleanor. How about Fresh Start? Proposed Jennifer. Perfect. That's what we've all done here. The clinic quickly gained a reputation in the region. Jennifer had developed a methodology that combined traditional physical therapy techniques with emotional support, especially effective in cases of trauma and depression. Mrs. Eleanor became the first official patient and then a kind of ambassador for the clinic, referring friends and acquaintances who were going through similar situations. Richard, keeping his promise to change, began dedicating part of his time to volunteer work, helping families in financially vulnerable situations. You know, he said to Jennifer one afternoon, I think losing part of my assets was the best thing that ever happened to me. Why? Because it taught me to value what really matters: family, trust, dignity. And do you regret it? What I did? Very much. But the outcome? Not one bit. Our family is closer now than it has been in years. One afternoon, while Jennifer was treating an elderly patient who had stopped walking after her husband's death, she reflected on everything that had happened. A year ago, she was a pregnant woman, alone and desperate, cleaning the floor of a mansion. Today, she was a respected physical therapist, mother of a healthy daughter, and part of a family that had welcomed her as one of their own. "Jennifer," said the patient, "how did you figure out I had nothing physically wrong?" "Because I went through something similar," she replied. "Sometimes, when the emotional pain is too great, the body finds a way to protect us." "And how did you overcome it?" "With help, and with the understanding that it's possible to start over as many times as necessary." When the session ended, Jennifer went to the crib where Eleanor was sleeping peacefully. The little girl had inherited her mother's dark eyes, and the light hair she imagined came from her father. "Michael," she whispered, speaking to someone who wasn't there. "You missed the chance to know this amazing girl, but we're okay. We're better than I ever dreamed we could be." For the first time since he had left, Jennifer felt she could forgive him completely, not because he deserved it, but because she no longer wanted to carry that weight. That evening, during family dinner, Mrs. Eleanor made an announcement. "I have a proposal for you." "What is it?" asked Jennifer and Richard in unison. "I want to make our partnership in the clinic official, but also our partnership in life. I want to adopt Jennifer as my daughter and Eleanor as my granddaughter." The silence that followed was one of surprise, not discomfort. "Mrs. Eleanor, it's not pity or charity, it's recognition. You are my family now, and I want to make it official." Jennifer felt her eyes fill with tears. "It would be an honor." "Richard, do you have any objections?" "On the contrary, I think it's the rightest thing we can do." And so, on a September afternoon, almost a year after that first meeting in the mansion's living room, Jennifer and Eleanor officially became part of the Thompson family. The judge who conducted the proceedings was moved by the story. "It's rare to see adoptions like this," he said, "based on true love, on the mutual recognition of worth." "We saved each other," explained Mrs. Eleanor. "Jennifer taught me to walk again, and I gave her a family." "And Eleanor?" asked the judge, looking at the baby in Jennifer's arms. "Eleanor taught us that love doesn't need blood to be real." 2 years later, the Fresh Start Clinic had become a regional reference in emotional physical therapy. Jennifer had published some articles about her methodology and given lectures at universities. Mrs. Eleanor, at 75 years old, not only walked normally, but had become an activist for the rights of the elderly, giving talks about financial abuse within families. Richard had completely paid off his debt to his mother and rebuilt his business on more solid and ethical foundations. More importantly, he had regained his family's trust. Catherine and the children visited often, and the grandchildren now had a little cousin to play with and protect. Eleanor grew up healthy and happy, surrounded by love and attention. At 2 years old, she was already saying a few words and had become the joy of the house. One Sunday morning, while the whole family was gathered in the garden for a barbecue, Jennifer looked around and felt a deep gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about how funny fate is. If Michael hadn't abandoned me, I never would have come to work here. If you hadn't stopped walking, I never would have realized what was happening. If Richard hadn't yelled at you that day, are you trying to say we should be thankful for our problems?" "I'm saying that sometimes the worst moment of our life is what leads us to the best." Mrs. Eleanor smiled. "You know, I think the same thing. If I hadn't discovered Richard's betrayal, I never would have met you. And I never would have discovered I could be more than a victim of circumstances." "Jennifer," said Richard, approaching them, "can I interrupt this philosophical conversation to announce that the barbecue is ready?" "Yes, you can," laughed Jennifer. "Eleanor is hungry anyway." As they walked to the table, Mrs. Eleanor still leaning slightly on Jennifer's arm, they watched Eleanor crawling quickly across the lawn, chased by her older cousins. "You know what's the most amazing thing about all this?" said Mrs. Eleanor. "What?" "That when you said I can make your mother walk, you were telling the truth, but not in the way any of us imagined." "How so?" You not only made me walk with my legs, you made me walk through life again. You made me walk toward the future, not just the past. And you taught me that family is something you build, not just something you're born into. They embraced there in the garden, two women who had met at the worst moment of their lives and had built something beautiful together. "Mom, Jennifer, come," shouted Eleanor from the height of her 2 years, confusing the two women as she always did. To her, they were both simply Mom. "We're coming, sweetheart," they responded in unison, laughing at the coincidence. And so, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the family that had formed in the most unlikely way celebrated not only the present, but all the possibilities of the future. End of the story. Now tell us, what did you think of this story of overcoming and family love? From where are you watching us? If this story has touched your heart in any way, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you believe Mrs. Eleanor made the right choice by giving her son a second chance? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company up to this point. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one.